Hey guys, it's GirlGotGame here with my final thoughts on Taisho Alice. This game was quite the journey, and I'm excited to discuss the highs and the lows with all of you, so let's get right into it. So to begin, to say this game was an absolute roller coaster would be an understatement. I really had no idea just how deep this rabbit hole was going to go when we started, and wow, what a game we got into this time. Now, before I go any further, this whole video is going to go into super duper spoilers, so if you haven't played this game yet or watched my series, then I implore you to please go and do so first, because this game has been such a unique experience for me, and is best experience for yourself first. Now that being said, I want to start with saying the premise of this game is super clever and so unique. The premise of gender-bent fairy tale characters is something that I think would appeal to a lot of fans of visual novels and dating sims, but the way that was implemented into the bigger, darker story behind the scenes was absolutely fantastic, and I got more invested with each passing route I did. I don't think I can overstate enough how incredibly clever the writing in this game is. The way that there are so many hints early on to what is going on, but without context it's really hard to figure out what it's hinting at, the pace at how the real story starts to make itself apparent, all while telling contained stories per boy that do an interesting twist on classic fairy tales is exceptional. I also want to shout out all the modern references that were interspersed in each route too. Those were so random and unexpected and added to the topsy-turvy feel of this game. And if all of that isn't enough to explain how good the writing is, I'll just add that I can't recall being berated and name-called to such a degree by a character as I was in this game. And I distinctly remember the very first episode I recorded being like, gosh, I don't know how much I'm going to enjoy this game, and this is how it starts. But then as the game progressed, I just wanted to give that same character the biggest hug I could, and was actually looking forward to what next ridiculous thing would come out of his mouth. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, all the characters had different unsavory parts to them to varying degrees, but the way they were written did endear me to them and genuinely made me care for them all. With maybe the exception of Gretel. No, I'm kidding. There's a small part of me that even feels bad for that crazy boy. But the writing's not the only thing great about this game. There's also some great art. There's a good variety of backgrounds that were utilized very well. Each character has about 2 to 3-ish sprite positions and quite a large variety of expressions, as well as there's a lot of animations to the sprites with them jumping around when excited, or they'd sink to show their sign, or they'd shake when they're scared. It really breathed a lot of life into these characters, and they were done very well in my opinion. And of course, so many of the CGs were absolutely gorgeous, and there's a good variety of them for each love interest. With the exception of Alice, the number of CGs for each love interest is also very consistent. I feel kind of bad that our final boy was lacking in his own personal CGs, but other than him, I really appreciated the amount of CGs we got for the other guys. And I want to shout out the animated intro for the game as well. Not only is it beautifully done, but I love that it was different for each episode, and that now that I know what happens in the story, I can see just how many hints and references are hidden in that little intro that also hints to the bigger story. Very well done. And also shout out to the fact that there were 4 different musical versions of the opening too, because they really set the tone for each episode. And since I just mentioned music, I'll segue into that section now. The rest of the music for the game was very well done too. Not a crazy variety of music, but a good amount, enough to set the correct tone for each scene, and they all kind of brought to my mind at least that fairy tale sound, if you will, the one I kind of associate with Disney princess movies, which of course was very fitting for this type of game. That being said, I didn't have a ton of favorites from the music selection in the game like I do in others, with the exception of 1 or 2 that I'll talk about later in my bonus awards section, but there also weren't any terrible pieces in there. The music was well done, but nothing really spectacular that blew me away. I do love the credits song though. It's absolutely beautiful, and I was definitely all in my feels when it played for the last time during the final route. Okay, before I move on, this is your last for real spoilers warning. You listen past here at your own risk, okay? Okay, you've been warned. So that being said, I want to talk about my thoughts on the protagonist Eureka Arisu, and I'm going to do my best to stay objective and hopefully not rant about her too harshly. To To say I have complicated feelings towards her would be a bit of an understatement. This girl... I don't know that I've met a more unreliable narrator of a story in my life. Of course, this is in part because of her herself slightly changing as a person, depending on whose world we're in. But a much bigger part of that is that she herself is not only misleading other characters in the story, but also the player of the story. She got me so many times. I think the only time I was really onto her was in Red's story, but even then she went above and beyond what I thought she was doing. Our girl is definitely a master strategist. She moves herself and the other characters around almost effortlessly to fit the outcomes she's aiming for. It's definitely impressive. Scary? Yes, but you can't argue that it's not impressive. Yurika is insanely smart and very manipulative. Even her own brother, who calls her out for that behavior, is not immune to being used by her to get what she wants. As such, I think I'm actually a little scared of Yurika, if I'm being honest. I would not want to be against her, because I would definitely lose. But with that being said, I also can't argue that she is one of the most unique MCs I've ever played. She has a very strong, defined character, and yet there's also room for subtle differences that you can see throughout the different routes. And then at the same time, those differences don't take away from who she is at her core. That's some exceptional writing to pull off. She's very much involved in all the stories. No one can accuse her of being a wallflower and not taking an active role in this game. So if you're looking for a very strong, well-written protagonist that has a lot of agency with a defined personality of her own, then you'll probably love Yurika. For me personally, as mentioned before, she scares me a little. But I do relate to her a little, notably in two areas. The first being that she pretends to be clueless and a klutz, but it's mainly an act to make others comfortable around her and probably so that they underestimate her a little, now that I think about it. But I distinctly remember doing that in my teen years. I had a hard time getting along with others around my age, and I remember I started acting dumber and klutzier to try and relate. And as a side note, it did actually work. I got invited to so many more parties after that, so mission successful, I guess. And the other thing that was relatable was her self-sacrificing attitude when it came to the guy she loved. Just her number one priority being his happiness, even if it meant her love was rejected, was something I could relate to feeling myself. That being said, though, I still can't overlook the manipulating part of her personality and how she views most people as chess pieces. Not to mention that there's the oh-so-small issue that she cheated on the guy she's been in love with since they were little. Now, I know you can argue that nobody was in any kind of relationship when this happened, that there was nothing official, but the fact that she herself thinks of it as cheating is telling in itself. I honestly don't think she's a good person. And I kind of low-key wish that Alistair had a better person to love, as harsh as that may sound. Oh, I'm gonna stop. I'm gonna stop myself there, since I'm starting to get into Alice route territory, and as I said before, I don't want to rant too much. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, my feelings towards Yurika are a bit on the negative side. If I'm being charitable, I'll say they're mixed, but I do think she's an interesting protagonist, and certainly a very unique one at that. Alright, and with that out of the way, it is time yet again for the hardest part of these videos, to finalize my boys list. And as always, this is based on the whole shebang with these guys. Personality, plot, romance, my attraction to them, blah 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 blah. And then once again, I'll have two more lists, one with chemistry between Yurika and the guy, and another list that involves just the story that was told and the twist on the fairy tale it was based on. At the bottom of my list, I'm sure this will come as a surprise to nobody, is our precious baby brother, Gretel. Gosh, just thinking about him is giving me PTSD flashbacks. I honestly struggled to get through that route in a way I haven't struggled in a long while, and that's not to say it wasn't good, or maybe good's not the right word. It was very well written, let's say that. The twist on the original fairy tale was extremely well done, and it was very interesting, all the symbolism and where they chose to take all of that. Gosh, what a heavy route. Not only was it a yandere route, complete with being locked up in a cage and drugged multiple times, but we also had a brother-sister relationship turned romantic, mental illness, drug addiction, near rape, detailed violence against several people. It was a lot. It was honestly mentally and emotionally exhausting. I will say, I'm still relieved that Eureka and Gretel ended up being adopted siblings only. But gosh, if I didn't feel extremely uncomfortable when Gretel called her sister every 5 minutes. I also will say, I should have seen that Eureka herself would end up being a yandere by the end of this, but because of her amnesia and being an unreliable narrator anyways, it took me so off guard until it was revealed at the end. And ironically, her being like him made her being with him not so bad in the end. They kind of deserve each other. And I do have to give Gretel some props for admitting to Ryoshi in the 11th hour that he was right about Eureka controlling him and about his addiction to the drugs. Plus, not only that, but he also accepted Ryoshi's prescription for what he needed to do to get his life back in order after Ryoshi had done him so dirty in the past. That took a lot of courage and humility to do that. And I actually did feel a little bit of heartwarmingness, is that a word? Heartwarmingness at him realizing how much Ryoshi and Mom and Dad actually did care about him by the end of the whole ordeal. They all majorly hecked up earlier by not getting his side of the story and isolating him and pumping him full of drugs, but somehow this absolutely ridiculous situation ended up in a closer family unit and a better, healthier relationship between him and Eureka. Even if they still roleplay as brother and sister in their private time, which I guess, hey, you do you too, I guess. Just don't subject me to it ever again, please. After Gretel, I'd have to put Red Riding Hood, our sheep in wolf's clothing and sometimes police officer. His route was kind of slow to start out, but once it got going, it ramped up rapidly to a point where I recorded for 2.5 hours straight because I wanted to keep reading to find out how everything ended. The writing and the mystery of Red's route was awesome. The fact that our MC was part of the convoluted ploy in this route and I had no idea what exactly was going on until the very end was impressive. I think the route also did a great job at hinting at certain things as the route was going along, such as Eureka being involved without it being too obvious. There's no question that the plot twists in this route were crazy, and I totally wasn't prepared for a number of them. That being said though, while the end goal of this plan, being to help Red overcome his guilt complex and accept forgiveness from his childhood friend, was certainly admirable, I do have to question the methods that were taken to get there. There were so many ways that this plan could have backfired spectacularly and put Red in an even worse headspace. Thankfully, this is a visual novel, and we were going for a good ending, but if not for that, this could have ended really badly for Red and possibly for everyone involved in this scheme. Still, I was happy to see Red finally learn the sins of his past weren't actually as huge as he had made out in his head, and for him to reunite with his old friend again. This boy even found love along the way. Or, to be more accurate, he found thirst along the way. Boy's got his hands full with Eureka, to say the least. Girl was thirsting for him since day one, which led to some very uncomfortable moments for Red. While some moments were funny or cute, most of Eureka's overtures to Red just made me really uncomfortable on his behalf. I did like the angle of her taming a wild animal, so to speak, that was happening with her, slowly gaining his trust and him starting out being averse to her touch, but then accepting it and seeking it out on occasion. But still, the aggressiveness with Eureka combined with Red's mind being constantly in the gutter and constant nosebleeds were not really my cup of tea. So, romance-wise, I didn't enjoy his route as much as some of the others. Alright, up next on my list is our handsome Prince Snow White. Even though I had a little forewarning, I really had no idea how much trauma we were going to get into when we started his route, but whoo boy did it deal with some dark subject matter. Once again, the fairy tale spin was very clever here as we discover throughout the route that this boy is actually asleep and experiencing a dream world that he controls, which in turn was a very nice mirror or reflection of what was happening in reality with our boy Alice, which again in turn is a nice play on the fairy tale with the theme of a magic mirror. This boy though had so much trauma, arguably the most out of all the personalities. The beginning of his route starts out fairly nicely with the classic fairy tale trope of love at first sight, a chance encounter in the woods where the prince saves the princess from her predicament only to disappear into the night. Thankfully, unlike in the original Snow White tale where prince and princess don't meet again until the end of the story, Our girl stubbornly goes out at night, every night, looking for her Prince Charming and succeeds in finding him, and very slowly melting his icy heart. As she gets to know him, she, and us the player, get to meet Mother for the first time in this game. And man, I didn't know what to make of her in the beginning. She did come across as so sweet, but basically every time we hung out with her, she tried to kill us. But she also seemed to want to replace her son with Eureka instead, so huge bag of mixed signals coming from there. Of course, later we discover Mother was kind of Snow White all along, since he had dreamed her up into this world and had turned it into a nightmare he was stuck in. And then we got the longest traumatic backstory of all in the game, in my opinion. Now, I had two favorite things about this route. The first was, I loved seeing Snow slowly gain more and more confidence to finally acknowledge the nightmare he had trapped himself in, and started working against it. And secondly, I really loved the weird dream aspect to everything in this world. While there is that aspect in other worlds, this one really felt like weird things were happening. There were these weird cuts between scenes, like things would be tense. Someone would walk out and then bam, next morning, let's have a funny breakfast. It was quite jarring, and even Eureka started questioning how did she get certain places from where things ended last. And then people started to disappear. Memories weren't right between Eureka and the other guys, and then we found out that Cinderella had the same memories of Mother that Red and Snow White had too, and then the flashback where Snow sees Alice in the mirror instead of himself. Gah, this route was great for story reveals and really getting my theories starting to come together into something more cohesive. The one place that this route fell short for me, though, was in the romance department. There were, of course, moments of romance, but this route focused so much more on the big picture story than on romance. As I said before, we did have the classic fall in love at first sight trope at play here, which was kinda cute. But Snow played with our hearts so many times, I guess trying to see how sincere Eureka was, plus a part of him not wanting to acknowledge he was in a nightmare, and her being there was majorly upsetting the balance of his world, which he had to fight against too. But gosh, the misunderstandings that happened constantly between Eureka and Snow, either deliberately caused by one or the other, that was tough to go through. I wanted to shake both of them throughout sometimes. But yeah, mainly because of the romance aspect, I'd have to put Snow where he is on this list. Coming up next would be the boy of the hour, Alice, or Alistair. Wow, what a ride his route was. The beginning was absolutely precious. I loved little Alice and Eureka. And man, did little Alice have the riz or what? Dude had major game. I mean, he may have been donning his alter ego for it, but dang, I wish I had an alter ego with that much game. I also absolutely loved jumping back through all the worlds we had visited previously, and it being after we had got our respective happy ends with each guy. Seeing just how much each of the guys had really changed and how much they cared for their Eurekas was so sweet and got me all up in my feels again for each of them. And of course, as we jumped through each world, we would get a series of flashbacks from Alice's perspective when those personalities were taking the brunt of the memories during his traumatic life. While we had seen a lot of the lead up to how this whole series of dream world hopping started in the Wizard's route, it was really nice to see it happening from Alice's perspective and get his view and thoughts on what was happening and his rationale for what he was doing. Gosh, I just want to protect Alice so badly, though. He went through so much and then put himself through even more trauma just because he fell in love with Eureka and wanted control of his mind and body so he could be with her fully. I honestly think he was terrified that she was going to end up like his mom. That night he walks in on Eureka crying, I think triggered that fear for him, since that was the last memory Alice had of his mom before she died and disappeared from his life. And I think that's why he took such dangerous and drastic measures to put himself to sleep in the hopes of finally being able to communicate with his other personalities. Oh, how I wish he would have been able to just take things slowly through therapy and learned another way to communicate with them all. But I guess if he had done that, we wouldn't have had this crazy story to experience. And finally, after we've gone through all the trauma from his entire life, we managed to catch up to Alice, the part of Alistair that wasn't absorbed by the darkness, and have such an adorable kiss scene with him. One of my favorites in the game, just because these two were so awkward about it all. And then the final meeting with all the boys. It was such an absolute delight to have them all there at the end, fully cognizant of everything that had happened, and just having such a reasonable and open conversation about it all. Probably my favorite scene of all in the game, honestly. It really highlighted the similarities and differences between them all, and I felt like there was a real bond between all of them. The fact that they were all able to come to a consensus that they all could live with and be happy with was just wonderful, and I loved how they tied in the whole Taisho democracy thing into it as well. And I'll be honest, the thing I was happiest about is that the boys decided not to reintegrate into one person. Like Yurika, I had come to love all of them. I was preparing myself for them to reintegrate, and I would understand if they had decided to. I would have been happy about that ending as well, since it would be Alice's and the other guys' decisions to do that, and I know things would have worked out well if that had happened. But sue me, I'm happy they all still exist. I also loved that all the personalities discussed it, and that they were willing to reintegrate, but even Alice himself didn't want to lose them, and so I loved that they worked out a compromise that they were all happy with. Also loved that Alice was willing to even let the other personalities out on occasion if they wanted to interact with certain friends of theirs, just as long as they weren't taking over all willy-nilly like they were originally. And I don't know, I loved how everyone went back to their worlds and were just so happy to be with their girl again. I'm a sucker for happy ends, okay? And I was so relieved they all got one. Even Alice, the grumpy tsundere butt side of Alistair, got a happy ending. I can't believe I was happy he got a happy ending, considering my thoughts on him in the beginning, but it was as good of a conclusion to the story as I could have hoped for, and I was very satisfied with it. And now we're hitting the top 3. At number 3, I'd have to give it to the wonderful Cinderella. Now, if you've been following me for even just a little bit, it won't surprise you to learn that I absolutely love this narcissistic boy. He's so my type. It also doesn't hurt that he brought up all of my old nameless Yuri feels while I was going through his route, but with the whole shoes thing either. I've gotta say, it's actually been a while since a flirty narcissist route has given me that twinge in the heart where things have been going well and progressing good romantically for a steady stretch, and then they pull the rug out from under you by suddenly going cold and breaking things off. Cinderella definitely gave me that twinge, even though I knew it was coming, and even though the reason he broke things off was noble of him, he still got me with that twinge! Granted, he could have picked a better time to break things off, i.e. not in front of Dad. But regardless, I loved seeing this boy's growth. He went from having this plan with his dad to marry some random rich girl to get them out of debt and skip town, to giving her up and working hard at a trade that he loves with the slim, selfish hope that maybe she'd wait for him to be worthy of her. What I really liked too is that they set up from the beginning that he wasn't too fond of this plan to begin with, but was going along with it for the sake of his dad, who he wanted to help get his life back together. Cinderella definitely comes across as very selfish and shallow when we first meet him, but Yurika is able to see pretty soon that he puts it on as a facade to deal with gold diggers, and that he actually cares very deeply for his family. Cinderella's route overall was very solid. It flowed right along at a good pace, and didn't have a lot in the way of plot twists. I really liked that both Yurika and Cinderella were deceiving each other and knew the other was deceiving them, even if they were unaware of all the particulars. It really put them on very even ground, and I also felt their personalities meshed extremely well. And now onto our once upon a time butler and man from the moon, Kaguya, coming in at number 2. This boy, I really didn't know what I was going to get into when I started his route, but unbeknownst to me, I was in for quite the ride once again. I gotta say, starting a route, watching a guy get slapped by who was his girlfriend just prior to the slap, and then have him turn around and ask Yurika out immediately after, and have her accept with no hesitation, really just put in my face, strap in, it's gonna be a ride. And if Cinderella gave me Yuri feels, this boy definitely gave me Iki feels throughout. I have to say, the first third to half of this route was really filled with just sugary, sweet, wholesome moments between Kaguya and Yurika. They really just hit it off right off the bat, and I enjoyed their interactions and dates so much. But then it becomes apparent that something's off with this boy, and then the shoe finally drops and we find out he's suffering from amnesia. And the next big chunk of the route focuses on that, trying to uncover what triggered his amnesia in the first place, what he's forgotten, etc. And it's through the interactions with his exes and a chance encounter with the woman who worked at the orphanage he lived in that we really start to put the puzzle together. And it's a dark puzzle. This boy went through so much. I honestly can understand why he wanted to forget it all. The last part of the route was the hardest for me to get through, not only because it dealt with some very heavy subject matter in the form of self-harm and suicide, but because you could see how much Kaguya was struggling once he had regained his memories and was still trying to put on the facade as if nothing was wrong, which in turn led to the escalation of Yurika trying to elicit some sort of response out of him by flirting with any guy in the immediate vicinity. It did work, and Kaguya really didn't give her a lot of other options at that point, but it was still hard to watch him go through when he'd already gone through so much up to that point. And the final showdown at the lake was probably the most intense one in the game. Not only did we get a long, heartbreaking flashback to everything Kaguya went through, but Yurika stops his attempt at going to the moon by stabbing herself in the stomach, thus fulfilling his impossible task and proving her love for him. Of course, she did stab herself, so there's the new big problem of her bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, with Kaguya passing out from the drugs he took earlier while trying to rush her to the hospital. Thankfully, this does have a happy ending, so they do make it to the hospital in time, and Kaguya starts expressing his selfish wants and desires. Granted, the pendulum kind of swung the other way, where he went from being super passive and being a doormat to being a little too aggressive. However, I was okay with it because I felt it was extremely realistic for him to go too far that way, considering he's been repressing his wants for such a long time, and I think he'll find a happy medium over time once he learns how to express himself. And he has a great support group, not only with Yurika, but also with Cinderella and Snow White as well. So all in all, I thoroughly enjoyed this route. It had a great balance between romance and conflict, and was hands down the route that had the best implementation of the fairy tale into the story as well. Absolutely well done. And finally at number 1, Mr. Wizard, the Mahotsukai. If you guys have watched my playthrough, then I'm sure his spot on this list comes as absolutely no surprise to anyone. Now, before I started the game, I will say I was very interested in the wizard. I mean, he's the only one of the guys without a dedicated fairy tale name, he's got a cat, and he's very good looking, okay? He is. And then we got our first bad ending, and damn, I got dunked in my Ukiyo feels like nobody's business and was like, crap, it's happening again, isn't it? I'm gonna fall for the break the fourth wall character who's unstable, aren't I? Yup, I sure did. It's almost unfair to the other guys, really, because I feel like I've been kind of getting to know the wizard throughout all these bad ends, and he was such a delightful mix of mystery, sprinkling these little hints to what's going on, and also just absolutely hilarious some of the time. Yes, I'm thinking of that "da fuck" bad ending in particular. And so my hype was at an all-time high when I finally got to his route proper. And then we were dropped into this crazy scenario where we were engaged to all of the guys we had romanced up to that point, which was absolutely mad. And I did hate that we basically had to cheat on all our fiancés by falling in love with the wizard, which I'm sitting here in my feels as I talk about that, since gosh, that mirrored heartbreaking reality again. But anyway... Our wizard is a detective in this world, which is great, since we received yet another blackmail letter. This time to settle down with one of our fiancés, and of course, the immediate suspicion is on one of them. So the wizard's brought in to settle the matter, although it soon becomes clear his ultimate agenda is really also to get us to pick one of them. Suspicious. Anyway, we start investigating things, but really we're getting to learn about our wizard boy more and more, and gosh, is it a sad story for him too. This route is where we finally get our answers regarding all the guys, really, and primarily Alice. While investigating, we have a weird sort of flashback, but also happening in real time thing, where Yurika and Alice kind of merge with their memories, and we find out that Alice was diagnosed with DID, dissociative identity disorder. And things really start falling into place all across the board once we learn that nugget of info. And then, an absolutely sorry excuse for a doctor got it into his bright noggin to create a quote-unquote new perfect, flawless personality to kill off the other personalities and take over Alistair's body, and then had the audacity to abandon him when this new personality, the wizard, refused to do it. And side note, I have to say, I'm impressed that a personality that was created specifically to be numb to the painful memories, which resulted in him being emotionally numb overall, still had enough goodness in him to not completely take over or to kill off the others, so kudos to the wizard for that. And then, perhaps unfortunately, not long after, the wizard falls into Eureka's clutches. I did really like how he was playing this game with her in the beginning, where he was able to mimic the other personalities well enough that even she wasn't sure if this was a new personality or if he was just the ones he was mimicking. But eventually, she does see through the deception, and then they start spending more and more time together. Now, I don't know if it's because I have wizard goggles on, but I feel like real-life Eureka maybe fell for the wizard more so than the other guys, with the exception of Alice. And I think it's because they're actually quite similar. Since the wizard has all the memories, he knows that no one has been there for Alistair or the others when they needed it, and the wizard's own experience is being discarded by his own creator. But then he meets this girl, who acknowledges his existence and was there for him. And I think this is very similar to Eureka's own experience in the way that she was neglected by her parents and brother, and had no friends at all since she had such an unusual appearance. Hence why she glommed onto Alice so much when he was the first one to treat her with some kindness. The fact that both Eureka and the wizard are excellent chess players is, I'm sure, no coincidence either, as they're both very adept at manipulating others to do their bidding. But as we find out, real-world Eureka is the superior chess player, as she's able to manipulate this boy into helping her woo the guy she really wants to get together with, Alice. And he agrees to it, even after she broke his heart unapologetically. Just getting all on my feels again. I must restrain myself. No more ranting. Anyway, back to his actual route. It ends with Dream Eureka basically role reversing with the wizard, where she's so in love with him, she'll do anything to help him win the love of the one he really wants to be with, and is quite happy if he wants to kill her after that goal is accomplished, even though he says if she does this, he's never going to return her affection since he knows she's not the real thing. But I get the feeling he does start falling for that dream girl by the end of the game. This is a headcanon of mine, and I'm just going to say it here since I don't know when else I will, so bear with me. But I feel like the wizard's world is actually the first one that was done in the timeline of getting these boys happy ending, mostly because of the freaking shattering realization that his dream Eureka is also his cat that we see in all the other routes, and he doesn't have the cat until he accepts her help. And I feel like real-world Eureka knew that the wizard out of anyone would need a much longer time to get to his happy ending than the other guys, which is why she helped him first. Which I feel means she did really care for him, even if the wizard's convinced himself that's not true. But I guess there's no benefit to coming in second place for someone like the wizard, and I can't blame him, honestly. I just hope at some point he comes to the realization Eureka did truly care for him, and this was the best way she could show that for him, even if it isn't ideally what he would have wanted. And I also hope he got the much better end of the stick, since he has a literal cat girl to spend eternity with, and she might be a touch less crazy than the real-life version of her, so fingers crossed. So, after all that ranting and raving, there you have it, my definitive list of the boys. And now on to the second of the lists, the chemistry between Eureka and the boy in question. At the bottom, I'd have to put Red. I'll be honest, most of his route was really uncomfortable, and I suffered so much secondhand embarrassment on his behalf. Girl has no concept of personal boundaries with this boy, and I just really didn't enjoy them together very much. Not to mention it felt super duper rushed since it all happened within the space of a week. After Red, I'd probably put Snow White. While he and Eureka had the love at first sight thing, plus a couple other cute moments, I don't know that I fully bought the romance from the two of them. They're definitely a more reserved couple. That being said, I do think they have the potential to grow into a really comfy, healthy relationship together, but just from the root alone, I didn't always buy a romance between the two of them personally. Next on the list, I put Gretel. Don't get me wrong, he and Eureka are definitely crazy about each other. And just crazy in general, but probably because we spent most of the route with amnesia, plus the whole power struggle thing between the two of them, plus the most important thing, the quote-unquote brother-sister relationship, it just didn't personally work for me. I will go on the record here and say that step-sibling relationships don't really bother me, especially if the two became siblings when they were at least in their late teens or so. But the fact that Gretel has an actual sister fetish is just a big ol' no for me. However, I am relieved that Gretel's dream Eureka is as much of a yandere as he is, and so they're perfect for each other. After Gretel, I'd put Alice. Alice gets bonus points for the adorable, wholesome childhood friendship thing he had going on with Eureka and how the two of them were reunited again all those years later. That was sweet. But the rest of it, with all the misunderstandings, unintentional and deliberate, plus the fact Eureka created some more trauma that made Alice split off another personality yet again, it's not a healthy relationship in my opinion. Next up, I'd put Kaguya. He and Eureka are pretty well suited. They're both super into romantic tropes, and they love to tease each other. They are both a little unhinged, though, what with him being possessive and trying to kill himself, and her literally stabbing herself in the stomach to prove her love to him. I mean, hey, I guess they're a good match in that way, too, but at least I feel like the two of them went through the worst of it together and came out on the other side stronger. Plus, they have the good support network in Snow and Cinderella, so I think they'll do just fine. Then I would pick Wizard as the next one. He and Eureka are just very well suited. They both are chaotic, love to tease and banter, and are clever enough to see through each other's deceptions. They play off of each other incredibly well, and I love their interactions together. They also give off power couple energy, which I also really like. And finally, Cinderella earning his spot at the top of this list. He is just a great guy, and I felt he and at least his dream Eureka were on the most equal ground. They're both clever, they were both deceiving each other, aware of the deception, and still fell head over heels in love anyway. They have some of the most amazing banter, and they're just a very fun couple that understand each other super well, and also seem to be good for each other. And then for my third list, the fairy tale ranking list. This one will be hard because they were all done so well. The bottom's the easiest one to list, the Wizard. He doesn't have a fairy tale. He's based around sort of being an amalgamation of all wizards everywhere and anywhere, and I didn't have a baseline to compare against, so there you go. After the Wizard, I'd probably put Alice. The only real incorporation of the fairy tale into Alice's route was the obvious looking glasses, and also him taking on the role of the White Rabbit that we chased. Still kind of disappointed there was no reference to Eureka being the Queen of Hearts, but I'll live. The one reference I did enjoy was Alice being the Red King. In the Looking Glass, Alice plays a game of chess against the Red King, who sleeps through the entire match while his pieces do the work for him. I also believe that when Alice checkmates the Red King, she's left wondering whether she was part of his dream or if he is part of hers, which is a nice nod to what happened here too. But just in comparison to the other fairy tale incorporations, I felt this was one of the weaker ones. Next, I'd have to put Cinderella. I loved all the incorporations of the fairy tale into his story, having two fleshly brothers instead of stepsisters, going from riches to rags, his love of glass making, having a foot fetish, plus the wizard coming in as fairy godmother at the end to transform him into a prince for the ball with his princess, and that's where they reunite instead of losing each other. It was very well done. After him, I put Red. Red's route was also extremely clever. I could tell the whole way through something wasn't quite right, but I didn't realize to what extent until the very end. I did figure that Wolf and Red were probably playing the opposite parts in this, but did not expect our girl Eureka to also be a wolf of sorts in this tale. And I was glad the grandma in this tale didn't die when Red thought she had. Also, Red being a literal wolf boy was great. Necessary? No, but definitely great. Now it starts getting real tricky in these final three because they were all absolutely outstanding. I guess for number 3, I'd pick Snow White. There was so much great symbolism in his route. Snow hating his beauty instead of the evil queen, the mother being both Snow White and the evil queen, the apple pie being Snow's favorite thing but also what caused his quote-unquote death, and why he has a severe eating disorder, how we found out Snow was really asleep the entire time inside this very limited space of a world, a glass coffin, if you will, Ryoshi being the huntsman that helped him, and how our girl was the prince to wake him up from the nightmare with a kiss. Also absolutely loved how the 3 times Mother tried to kill Eureka were based off of the Brothers Grimm fairy tale. Oh gosh, I nearly forgot the magic mirror. The heck? Snow White recited that line so many times. I don't know how I blocked that from my memory. I'm so sorry. Anyway, I loved how the mirror was magic because it showed Snow what he truly looked like and how he wanted to hide away by creating a better mirror reality to live in. That was also fantastic, and it was one of my favorite adaptations in the game. At number 2, I'm going to put Gretel. I was astonished at the twist they put on that fairy tale. The symbolism was unreal in his route. Abandoned by parents, being addicted to the candy of the drugs he was on, the two of them playing with the fiery furnace of being attracted to each other even though they were step-siblings and worried that would ruin their relationship forever, Eureka being locked in a cage, but really finding out Gretel was the one in a cage all along that Eureka had put him in, because she was the witch all along that wanted to devour Gretel. Gosh, I'm getting dizzy again just thinking of it all. There's more there to dissect, but I'll just end it there by saying it can't be overstated how well done the twist on that fairy tale was done for Gretel's route. And at the top, I have to give it to my Moon Prince Kaguya. His fairy tale was the one I was the least familiar with going into it, so I actually read the story before playing, which is why it was the freshest in my mind. The parallels between his route and the fairy tale were absolutely phenomenal, even down to the detail of the suitors. I loved the twist that they were all horrible here, and that they brought fake things to try and trick him into getting back with them, even though they didn't care about him at all. Of course, there was a ton of symbolism with the moon and what it stood for in his route, which got a lot darker than I was expecting. And of course, who can forget the diary that Eureka and Kaguya shared, representing the love letters between the princess and the emperor in the original tale. All in all, definitely my favorite adaptation and twist on the fairy tale, but honestly, it was super hard to pick. All the stories were done so incredibly well, and I enjoyed the heck out of them. So there you have it, my final 3 lists. And if you're looking at these and wondering why I didn't mention the after-story epilogue portion thingy, at risk of ranting again, let's just say if I was going to rank it, it would be at the bottom of all my lists. I think the reasons are pretty self-explanatory, and I'll just say that story did real-world Eureka 0 favors and leave it at that. Good? Good. Okay, moving swiftly on then to the bonus awards section. Best outfit of the guys has to go to the wizard in his detective suit. Boy got hotter than he already was somehow. Next award is for favorite CG. This was super difficult because there's so many gorgeous ones, but I did have to go with the final one of the wizards. Eureka sitting on his lap while he's sitting on a throne playing chess with that soft, mischievous smile between them. Ah, makes me weak. And for favorite kiss CG, I was torn between Cinderella's first kiss CG and Kaguya's kiss, but I'm leaning more towards Kaguya's just because it was proper mouth on mouth, and I love that they had their first kiss in that soft daylight in the hospital. But Cinderella did almost win because of the gorgeous sparkle lights going on in the background of his. It was tough to pick between those two. Next award is for my favorite bad ending, which was a super easy pick. Definitely giving that to Red's second bad end with the wizard yelling, "Da fuck!" I died laughing at that. The funniest scene in the game I knew was going to have to go to Alice somewhere, and I finally settled on Eureka's first encounter with him in Cinderella's world. There is such a long-winded tirade from that boy, but the highlight for me was definitely his "Rejoice, peasant! Enjoy your beloved tsundere content" line. That was fantastic. And I do want to give a shout out to my other favorite Alice insults. One corn dog shy of a picnic, and Nymphoslut. This guy had the best insults, and I don't know that I'll ever come across such gems in any game ever again. Favorite Eureka outfit is her dress at the end of the wizard's route. I love that it matches his colors, and her black bow that looks like cat ears is so cute too. But I do want to shout out the close runner-up, which is the dress she wore dancing with Cinderella. That looks absolutely stunning from what little I can see of it, and if we had got a full-length version of that, that probably would have won. Favorite Eureka across the worlds would probably be the one from Cinderella's route. I felt that Eureka was the most stable and the most relatable. She felt just like a normal girl, and I liked playing as her quite a bit. My least favorite Eureka, hands down, has to go to real-world Eureka for very self-explanatory reasons, and at risk of ranting yet again, I will leave it at that. Favorite piece of music was Let's Pretend. That music is so ingrained into my head with bad ends and wizard shenanigans, and I always get a derpy grin on my face when it plays. And final award is for favorite epilogue after the credits rolled, and I have to give it to Cinderella. Them practicing their marriage vows with the glass slippers was just so beautiful, and it healed a small part of my Yuri heart that is still hurting from Nameless, so thank you, Cinderella, for that. And those are all the bonus awards I could come up with. I hope you enjoyed listening to my final thoughts on this crazy adventure of a game. It was such a journey and such a brilliant premise for a visual novel that was expertly written and executed at a great pace, with characters that you can't help but feel for, with a bunch of ridiculousness and laughs along the way to help ease the tears and heartache. And Protagonist aside, is one that I would still recommend for anyone who's looking for a very unique visual novel experience. Alright, with that, I would love to hear from you guys as well, what your thoughts were, how your list or lists ended up looking, and if you'd love to do these bonus awards as well, or have some bonus awards of your own, as always, I would love to hear it. And with that, that's officially a wrap! We did it! Now, if you're on my Discord, or you've been eagle-eyed in the comments section, then you know what games are coming up already. But if you haven't heard, I'll be continuing my journey in both game universes by playing Psychedelica of the Ashen Hawk and Taisho Alice Heads and Tails. Guess next time I see you will be for a whole new psychedelic experience. Or perhaps I'll see you for the continued shenanigans of this world. Either way though, thanks again for watching. Hope you enjoyed my final thoughts. And as always, until next time, I will see you later.